if you're already doing GEO and using an AI visibility tool, and those tools are predicting prompts for you and tracking your visibility for individual prompts, know that in reality, you probably aren't predicting the actual prompt someone's writing in, because they don't type in short keywords into these LLMs and they have long conversations. Even if you were able to guess the exact prompt that a real user is typing in, the generated output is not the same when your AI visibility tool or you yourself manually are checking in an incognito window or through ChatGPT's API. The real user is getting a very, very personalized response. The online narrative we have heard to date has been heavily, and as we'll argue, too heavily focused on things like this. None of it is about how to actually influence whether they even know your brand, the LLMs, or more importantly, as we'll talk about later, whether they associate your brand name with good products in your space or good solutions for pain points that your customers have that you solve. Welcome to this webinar on being visible in AI search. I'm Devesh Khanal. I'm one of the co-founders of Grow and Convert. And we're going to talk about all of the principles, both the strategy and specific tactics that we have tested and that we apply to our clients that we think companies that are trying to do GEO, AEO, or just be visible in AI search can and should employ. So first, a brief introduction for us. If you're watching this and you don't know who we are, historically we were an SEO agency. Now that's SEO plus GEO or AI search. And we've had a bunch of brand name clients, but what is relevant to this discussion on GEO is that we developed a framework for SEO a long time ago that we call pain point SEO. It now has its own search volume and terms around it where people look at it. And this was based on an idea that most SEO advice was around chasing traffic. And we found that that actually wasn't what actually moved businesses forward in terms of using SEO to generate pipeline, leads, customers, sales. And so pain point SEO was our framework to solve that. That same thinking is what we've applied to AI search to say, what is the common advice? And is that actually going to move the needle for most brands? And if not, what should they be doing instead? So before we get into the AI search strategy, I want to just quickly run some numbers and cover some numbers of why AI search matters, even if your analytics is showing small AI traffic to your website. So this is a real client, anonymized to protect their privacy. This is, as of early 2025 to 2026, their ChatGPT traffic plus the other AI tools. So you notice a few things. One, ChatGPT is sort of a huge winner. Nowadays, it's starting to, Claude and Gemini are starting to pick up. But the other thing is just the numbers. You're like, okay, these are in the hundreds of visitors a month or sessions per month. That same client, if we look at traditional Google organic traffic, they have numbers in the tens of thousands. 12,000, 16,000, 11,000. So it's very easy to say, why should I care from a marketer's perspective about this AI search when I just look at the numbers and Google is still higher? There is some truth to that, is that this whole narrative of ChatGPT and AI is going to sort of kill Google so far at the time of this recording in the middle of 2026 does not seem to be true. But it doesn't mean that AI search is not relevant. What we're seeing here in both cases is measurable traffic, in this case from Google Analytics, GA4, from these sources. But the issue with AI is that you can't measure most of that traffic. Think about like Google, the traditional Google organic. We'll talk about AI overview and mode later. Traditional Google organic SEO, you Google a term, Google gives you a list of websites that discuss something relevant and you click into them. But in AI, it's not so simple. So it's something like ChatGPT. Think about your own usage. When you use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, how many times do you click on a source? What we're seeing here is traffic that's actually attributable to ChatGPT, but most people don't click on sources. If a customer relevant to you is asking about product recommendations in your space, ChatGPT is going to give them a text output response. And if they're giving the text output response, they may not click on any of the sources. They may see your brand name or a competitor's brand name, and then they'll just Google it. That'll appear, if they Google your brand name, it'll appear as Google Organic. They'll open a new tab, Google your brand name, see your homepage, click into it. You're saying, oh, this is organic, Google Organic SEO traffic to our homepage. It wasn't really. It came from ChatGPT. Just your analytics software can't pick that up. And if you're not doing GEO, these people are still having that conversation. Your customers are still having that conversation with AI tools. And they're just going to their competitor's site, and you're not even seeing that. So if these numbers are in the 500 range, if we say, how often do people click? How often do you click on a source? If it's 1 in 20, already you equal that 10,000 in this graph here. But if it's 1 in 50, it could be, that would be even higher. This is why it's relevant. So when that's established, now the next question is, so what matters? How do we affect this? The online narrative we have heard to date, in our opinion, has been heavily, and as we'll argue, too heavily, focused on things like this. Add FAQs, because LLMs like question and answer format. Add this file called llms.txt, which explains to these LLM crawlers what your site is about. Make sure your schema is right. Change your headings to questions, and on and on. Add a bunch of bullet point summaries of your content, because that'll help AI understand it. What is the commonality of all of these? They are all tweaks to your existing content or site with the aim of helping these LLMs crawlers better understand or digest the content on your site. That's the commonality. Adding FAQs, better understand what's on your site. Bullet point summaries, same. llms.txt, understand the whole site and the site structure. Making schemas right, make sure they can crawl the site. None of it is about how to actually influence whether they even know your brand, the LLMs, or more importantly, as we'll talk about later, whether they associate your brand name with good products in your space or good solutions for pain points that your customers have that you solve. And when I say products, by the way, I mean products or services. And in fact, this online narrative is so strong, I apologize to Matt Kenyon. I have no idea who you are. I'm sure you mean well, and it's not just him, but I found this. This online narrative is so strong, people are posting on LinkedIn things like, you should do an llms.txt file, even though their post literally will say no major LLM vendor currently consumes this in their crawler index pipelines. Which, by the way, since then, now we're seeing other people in our industry start to show some early evidence that maybe llms.txt is being consumed, but as we'll argue, this is easy. If you want to do it, you can, but this cannot be your complete GEO strategy or even the core of your GEO strategy. And it seems to be unnecessary. We're getting great results for our clients without any llms.txt file. So what does influence the LLMs? Well, this is going to be a very simplified explanation. So if anyone here is sort of deep in the GEO world, or you happen to be an engineer for OpenAI or Anthropic, in which case I would first ask, why are you listening to this? But in either case, know that I'm aware that there's a lot more nuance than how I'm about to break it down. But for most marketers, thinking of it mentally in these two buckets is convenient and close enough and directionally accurate. Two ways to influence LLMs. Their training data, I'll actually start with what's on the right. Their training data. I say training data as shorthand in order to avoid jargon. What that means is their model of the world, in LLM jargony speak, they call it the parametric memory. Their model of how the world works, each concept, including your product space, right? And that's informed from their initial training data and subsequent retrainings. But their training data is what sort of guides their understanding of every concept that you could possibly ask them about in the world, right? They used a massive amount of training data initially. They updated every once in a while. Or it's the searches they do when you're having a conversation with them and they say, hang on, searching the web. Everybody has experienced this. Those are the two input sources. Again, I'm simplifying. Yes, they have direct relationships with the Forbes and Reddit and whatever. But by and large, you are not Forbes and Reddit. If you are Forbes or Reddit, why are you listening to this conversation or this webinar? But if you're just a brand, those are the two main things. And we're going to talk about whether Reddit makes sense as a brand to market in later. Getting in their training data would be amazing. That is the greatest thing, is if in their model of your product space, in LLM's model of the world, it includes their understanding of your space. In your space, if you were just automatically, your brand name was associated with good products in your space, the way incumbents are. If you ask an LLM without searching the web, you ask ChatGPT, give me some recommendations for CRMs, 100% chance they will mention Salesforce because it's just so common. It's probably all over their training data. That would be ideal. But how do you do that? It's not clear. These companies don't release how often they update their training data, what's included. It's a black box, of course, right? Because it includes them, I'm just going to say this, digesting and importing a bunch of copyright data. That's why they're in lawsuits and all this. Authors and all are objecting, right? So they don't talk about that. So this is just your long-term brand building to eventually get your brand so aware in your space that anything that the LLMs could possibly consume associates your brand name with the space. Yes, that's your long-term goal. It's not immediately influenceable. So then it leaves web search as the major lever that you can pull as a marketing team or as a marketer. So that then leads to our guiding framework for GEO we use ourselves. We talk about what we're going to talk about here and we use on our clients is this tiered priority system of what to work on. At the bottom, the most foundational that I'll spend my time arguing here is owned content on your site that ranks for relevant terms related to your product space so that when the LLM search the web and someone asks for recommendations in your space, there is a chance at least your name gets mentioned and is on their radar. As we'll know with all things GEO, there's never a guarantee. There's all probabilities. Or being mentioned in other people's content that's ranking for those relevant terms. And only after that, at the top of the pyramid, least important are these on-site tactics. So functionally, the reason this is less important is these are functionally helping your GEO in a different way than the on-site tactics. As we mentioned, these content tweaks are about helping LLM crawlers or LLMs better understand your site or digest the content on your site. This is different. This is saying, you know what? Large language models, they can understand human language. So if humans can understand our site, I think they can navigate our site just fine, right? What I always tell people is these things can pass the LSAT, which for those that are international is the US lawyer test to become a lawyer. They can pass that. Not because somebody summarized and added bullet point summaries and FAQs of dense legal textbooks. They can just understand it as is. I think they can handle your marketing site just fine. But instead, what these do is they expose your brand to the LLMs. And as I'll talk about later, an important part is expose your brand in connection to the terms that are relevant that you want your customer to associate with your brand. In other words, the pain points that they have. So if we conclude, if you're on the same page there and say, okay, that's fine. So I want the content that ranks for the relevant, search terms so LLMs can see that. What kind of content is that? The answer is bottom of funnel, product related content. What do I mean by that? I mean that in contrast to what? In contrast to top of funnel informational type of content that companies and the SEO and content marketing world have been used to doing and have the muscle memory and habits to do for the past 20 or more years. We're talking about the ultimate guide to this, an intro guide to that, and how to do this. Informational content that's not about what product is best for X. We're saying don't do that informational content. That's not relevant. It's bottom of funnel, and here's why. Only product-related conversations, queries, or topics between user and LLM get brand mentions by LLMs. For example, in our space, for us as a content agency, for both SEO and GEO, we want, of course, ChatGPT or Claude or whoever to recommend us when the customers are sort of asking about that. If a customer asks, a potential client asks, I want to grow my software business with content marketing, how should I get started? ChatGPT will happily answer that question for them. It's not going to mention us. This customer didn't ask about agencies. If the conversation naturally moves to, hey, I don't have the resources for this, how can I delegate? Sure. But until then, that's a bottom of funnel query. Like, who should I hire to do content marketing? But informational top of funnel queries, things like this was classic and old fashioned content in SEO. We have tons of those things. How to do SaaS content marketing, blah, blah, blah. They still work, by the way, very well in traditional Google. But this doesn't make sense as an LLM, an AI search strategy, GEO or AEO search strategy. But instead, if you say later in the conversation, I asked, okay, well, I want to hire an agency to do it for me. Any recommendations? Look what it does. I took this screenshot right as it did this, searching the web. You can ask yourself, and you know this from your own usage. Ask about how to improve your tennis swing, and then later say, I'm looking for a new racket. In one of them, it'll just answer it. The other will say, searching the web, and give you a bunch of racket recommendations. It's true of B2C queries and B2B. Same for products. I'm looking for the best document signing or digital signature. It sometimes even tells you searching for digital signature alternatives to DocuSign pricing. It even tells you this. People call these fan out queries. We won't get into the details of those right now. And that's ChatGPT searching the web. But ChatGPT is not the only LLM. Google is still getting a ton of traffic, and Google has these two LLMs or AI tools, let's call them AI tools, in their SERP in traditional Google, AI Overview and AI Mode. And those we're noticing, this is data from our AI visibility tool tracker that I'll briefly mention at the end only, where we're tracking the brand visibility. I've covered over the brands so for privacy. And you notice some of the highest numbers are on AI Mode and AI Overview. Why? Because those, even more than ChatGPT, are pure search summarizers. They never answer a question without linking to sources. And if you look at their documentation and all, the AI Overview and AI Mode are basically summarizers of the search results. It goes and looks at the search results for every single thing you ever ask it. And so here's an example where I ask, what are some of the best content marketing agencies? It mentions us, it cites our content, etc. So that's even more so search is important. And then Perplexity and Gemini are also very search-based compared to ChatGPT. And I don't want to get into the details, but we looked at this tracker data and plotted it for 19 clients. And yes, AIO and AI Mode we have the highest visibility for them because we rank all of our clients for relevant SEO terms. But Perplexity and Gemini are markedly higher than ChatGPT. Perplexity itself is search-based. You can never ask it anything and it doesn't find citations. That's what it's built for. Gemini is general purpose, and sometimes it won't search, but we've just in our data, we're seeing it consistently higher on average than ChatGPT in terms of visibility. So that's why we recommend starting here. Start with your own content where you can kind of build that. Now, that should sort of give you the foundation of, hey, maybe instead of worrying about llms.txt and adding FAQs and bullet points everywhere, we need to start thinking about, have we identified terms that both humans and LLMs could be looking for when people are looking for product recommendations in our space? Are we ranking for those at least on traditional Google so that the LLM crawlers can also find it? In other words, do we have a strategy to actually influence the LLMs, or are we only trying to tweak the content on our site for the crawlers to better digest our content, which we, Grow and Convert, are arguing is probably not that necessary. But now that you bought into that, the question now is, okay, so tell me about this content that I should be writing. What are the details of it? And there is this nuance that I've been hinting at so far, which is that kind of content is not quite the same as what you're used to in SEO. So we talked about already, it should not be top of funnel SEO content like ultimate guide to content marketing, etc. You need to first focus, that's fine, but you need to first focus for a GEO perspective on, do we have content that's going to rank for all sorts of permutations that LLM crawlers could ask when they're literally looking for, in our case, a content agency. In the DocuSign case, digital signing software. You can insert your kind of brand and space from there. Now, beyond that, there's this other important nuance about GEO, which is, unlike SEO, which is short keywords and Google has very minimal context about you, in AI search, customers don't type in short keywords like best trucking software. They have a long conversation. So already the LLM, unlike regular Google, has a lot more context and nuance of exactly what they're looking for. In addition to that long conversation, most of these LLMs, when users are logged in, which the vast majority of people that are sort of power usering and likely looking for product recommendations in your space are logged in. They're not using an incognito logged out browser version of ChatGPT. it has all that context about them from previous chats. And so the way LLMs recommend products, traditional LLMs, ChatGPT, Claude, Geminis of the world, is by doing a very careful pattern match between the user's highly specific needs and a product that it thinks can match that. And we call this concept invisible prompts. We have a whole article on it. You can find it. Google invisible prompts grow and convert if you want to find it. So what I mean is, when you ask something as simple as find me a content agency, again, using us as an example, in Google, two people ask find me a content agency, they're going to be served roughly the same results with maybe some geographical differences or whatever. But in an LLM like ChatGPT, find me a content agency, that's not the end of it. Even if you know that prompt, that's not actually the end of that prompt. Because the reality is what ChatGPT is doing, or Claude or Gemini, is it's saying, hold on, oh, this user is asking for a content agency? Well, what else do I know about the user? Okay, they're running this type of business with this many employees. They're busy. They did this. They've asked me about this. I know their budget is this much. I know they've already invested in this channel and that channel. It has all this context. So a huge warning to everyone is if you're already doing GEO and using an AI visibility tool like a Peak, Profound, Scrunch, or what have you, and those tools are predicting prompts for you and tracking your visibility for individual prompts, know that in reality, number one, you probably aren't predicting the actual prompt someone's writing in because they don't type in short keywords into these LLMs. They have long conversations. That's first of all. And the nuance is that when you change the prompt, the whole answer can be different. In fact, even for the same prompt, there's a probability aspect and the answer could be different. But even if you were able to guess the exact prompt that a real user is typing in, the generated output is not the same when your AI visibility tool or you yourself manually are checking in an incognito window or through ChatGPT's API. The real user is getting a very, very personalized response. Here's an example that I love. A real client of ours who found us on ChatGPT and is now a great client of ours asked, we said, can you send us the chat? She said, sure. And the key prompt at the beginning of the chat was, what are the best SEO companies in your opinion who've driven massive results with endless leads for people in our kind of space? She doesn't even need to tell it what kind of space it's in. It answers the question that mentions us first. Okay. She reaches out to us. We have a great conversation. She's now a client. First of all, good luck tracking this exact prompt in this exact wording. But even if you did, when I tested this in an incognito window of ChatGPT, a session without my personalization, with no personalization, it didn't mention us at all anywhere. The whole thing was different. And when you look here, look at the specifics it's saying of why it's recommending Grow and Convert to her. High intent content marketing. As I explained at the beginning, that's been our MO for 10 years. For lead gen businesses, that's her type of business. Real case studies where they 10x lead volume for SaaS and B2B. So it's looking at really specific stuff, not one piece. This is the difference with SEO. In SEO, it's like you only need one article to rank for one keyword. You're good. But here it's saying, I've read a bunch of stuff about Grow and Convert, and I noticed they have case studies that are relevant to you and your specific situation or business. So that old SEO thinking of like keywords, we want to rank for this keyword, where people just say, oh, prompt. Now we just insert the word prompt for AI search where keyword was. You throw that out the window. That's not how this works. And then this old SEO thinking of Google is going to recommend the biggest brands or domains and we need backlinks and all that. There's some relevance. It seems like, ChatGPT and all seem to have some level of brand awareness. But the reality is that they're recommending stuff on extremely specific situations. So what that means from a content strategy perspective is that your job is publish content that teaches the LLMs about those situations and why your product or service is relevant. We call this a company's topic map. Think about all the topics that branch out like a subway system in this little graphic. All the topics where it could make sense, where you would want, if you could wave a magic wand, you would want your brand name to be mentioned. Case studies, a specific situation, pain points, competitors they could be switching out from, all of these situations. Highly specific. And when you create that content, be specific. So in executing, we're talking about tier 1 owned content. Let's be really specific and summarize. Focus on bottom of funnel, not enterprise password manager if you're a password manager, or yes, enterprise password manager if you're a password manager, not trends in security or password management tips. So do bottom of funnel. And then as much detail as possible. Here, have case studies that say in this exact situation, it's relevant. You know, this type of customer, we had this person, she was in this situation, she had these issues, and our solution was great for her. Here are quotes, here's how we solved it. Build that library so that later when the LLMs have their customer, oh, they're in this situation, they can say, you know what? I found this brand that's published a case study of someone in exactly your situation. So that's your own content. Offsite mentions, we have yet to talk about this. So like we said, they're seeing a bunch of other sites. You could also be a brand that's mentioned in other people's content that's ranking when LLM search the web to understand stuff. The common advice here is, oh, Reddit, or Reddit and Wikipedia or YouTube. Why? Because people publish graphs like this and do these studies. This one's from SEMrush and then quoted by Statista that say, you know, we analyze like thousands of different randomly selected prompts and we see Reddit, blah, blah, blah. But you don't care about randomly selected prompts. You care about the prompts that are relevant in your industry. We looked at that with our own data from our tool tracker. And we found that 86% of the domains that were cited in these bottom of funnel product related prompts were industry specific sites. Only 14% were general sites like Wikipedia and Reddit. Here are some examples. In trucking management software, look at the domain cited. The tracker says Transvirtual Toro, that's our client, TT News, dump truck dispatcher, there's no Reddit here. California job training for a job training site. All these .gov California sites. So that's offsite mentions tier 2. Then finally we get to these content tweaks in tier 3. Here's our take on it. From everything we've seen to date, they don't seem to be really necessary. Most of these tweaks don't seem to be necessary at all. For the vast majority of our clients, we're getting great visibility and we're not using these. LLMs, like I said, don't need help reading. They passed the LSAT. They can do like complex physics, not because someone broke it down at a third grade reading level for them. But yes, some people argue, you know what, but this is low effort. I can create an llms.txt. Sure. If you want to do that, fine. We don't see any evidence that any of that is going to hurt. And so if you think it's going to help, that's fine. But my caveat is if this is your entire GEO strategy, good luck. Last section briefly is how do you measure performance? The challenge with AI search is there is no longer this clean attribution path that your analytics software can do and see to say, hey, my SEO, for example, was working. In SEO, it was user search as a keyword. They see your result, they click, they convert. Your analytics can see that. Oh, there's a click, it came from Google Organic. But AI search, as I mentioned before, is different. User has a conversation, the LLM recommends a brand. What do? Some may click into a source, but how many times do you click into a source? They open a new tab and Google that brand name. Then they Google you. That shows up as Google Organic. That's not true. That's not really what drove them there. The LLMs drove them there. And so the conclusion is, hey, AI search is making measurement messy. Yes. That is true. But what we're saying is from what we've seen, most companies aren't even doing the basics. So I'm saying don't try to solve this. This is very difficult to solve. Our recommendation is ask in your lead forms, sales conversations, surveys, how did you hear about us, and watch that and see if the numbers are changing. See if they mention ChatGPT and if that number is going up. But in the meantime, do the absolute basics. Make sure you're measuring where traffic is coming from. Those traffic graphs I mentioned at the very beginning, make sure you're measuring that. Make sure you're doing some kind of conversion attribution. Discussing that is way beyond the scope of this webinar. It would take too long. And then lastly, measuring AI visibility is relevant. I will only very briefly, we may do a separate webinar on Tracker and how we do it, but I'll only briefly mention that. And we have our tool, you can check it out, tracker.ai. A key thing that Tracker does that you can do however you measure it. Tracker does this automatically, but our recommendation to you, regardless of what tool you do, is don't think of visibility tracking and AI search at single prompt level the way you used to think of keywords in SEO because of what I mentioned. One, you don't know the exact prompts people are typing in. They're not typing in best password manager for LastPass, for example. They're just not typing that in. Some may, but most of them are having long conversations. For our customers, they're not typing in content agency into ChatGPT. They're having a longer conversation. And so what we do, you can't predict that a priori, but you can look at overall, how often are you getting mentioned? If instead what you do is say, hey, let's think of it as a topic basis. So for us, we would say like SEO agency is a topic separate from content agency, separate from GEO or AI search agency. So in each of those topics, come up with 3, 5, even 10 different prompts or different ways that someone could poke at or ask that topic. You'll then know, hey, be aware, I'm not claiming that any of these ways that I came up with, these exact prompts, are exactly what a user is typing in, but it doesn't matter because you're not going to be able to predict that anyways. And even if you can predict that, the user's getting a custom result anyways. But I can at least poke at that topic in different ways. And then you can say, on average, I've asked 10 different ways about a content agency. How often are we being mentioned? I've asked 10 different ways about a password manager. How often are we being mentioned? And then look at those numbers over time. Then you can see overall trends. Hey, for us, for example, for content agency for SaaS, we have really good visibility on most of these LLMs. But if we switch it to SEO agency, it's a lot more competitive and we're not recommended as much. And if that's relevant to us to be recommended there, then we're going to fix that. Then maybe we need to do some of the tactics I mentioned earlier and produce content that's associating Grow and Convert's brand name with terms and topics like SEO agency, for example. That's how you should do it. This is our overall overview of how AI search works and what's working today and what we do for our clients. But in many ways, it's sort of scratching the surface. You can sign up for our newsletter if you want more information like this on growandconvert.com. You can try Tracker yourself and get a demo from me or Benji, my co-founder at Grow and Convert. Personalized demo to your brand, or sign up yourself. It's a 7-day free trial. You can also reach out to us at Grow and Convert if you're looking for an agency to help you, or follow me or Benji on LinkedIn for more information like this.